Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and this is the Eddie Network podcast. I'm glad you're here today. And my guest today is Dennis Pitocco. And obviously, you can tell by the sign over his head, he's a 360-degree nation person. But I don't know what that is, and he's going to tell us about it. But Dennis, I'm glad you're here, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what are you involved in.
Well, thanks, Ed. I'll talk about that 360 Nation because that kind of embraces everything I'm going to say from this point forward. Let me back up a little bit. I spent 30 years in the banking world across America, Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, and my wife spent a lot of time in that same world. I met her over in England when I was running a business there, and ultimately we came back to Florida and settled down. And we were one of those rare couples that had enough success early in our career that we could retire, but too young to really do that. And then we're faced with what do you do now? It's like the dog chasing the car, Ed. You caught the car. Now, what are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
So, just kind of bringing the backstory forward, we decided we were going to start intentionally discovering the world beyond the USA. And we were doing that because we just had this belief, having been around the world, far too many Americans never leave this country. The last I saw a stat on that, Ed, was 60% that have never. Now, I understand part of that because, as you know, you could spend the rest of your life discovering America. It's so big. But we've learned through making that commitment to what I call intentional travel. Intentional means not only where we're going, but doing it on purpose. In business, I traveled the world, but I only saw boardrooms, airports, taxis. I can tell you I've been to South Korea, but I can't tell you anything about it. So we started down that path. Second thing we wanted to do was to give back, and everybody uses those words give back, but we meant more than just writing checks. We're talking about our time, our talent, and our treasure. We both had a heart for it, but because of our business lives before we theoretically retired, we didn't have time to do it. So we started doing that, and that's really mushroomed into some big commitments around the world, locally, nationally, joining boards, etc. And the third thing was, how do you keep your mind active? Didn't weren't Well, actually, we weren't interested in pickleball. We weren't going to do crossword puzzles. So I said, I'm going to build a website. That was the beginning of 360 Nation. That was about a dozen years ago. Just answering the generic question, what 360 Nation is, we're different. And I always start out by telling people how we're different. We're a for good versus for profit enterprise, which means we do nothing to generate a bottom line. We're blessed to be able to say that there's no advertising, there's no marketing, there's no sales pitches. We don't sell anything. You don't see pop-ups on our website. So what that does, it's given us the freedom to build something without that pressure of profit. It's also an opportunity and a responsibility to do what makes sense versus sense, CENTS. So what are we about? Well, our objective was, let's see if we can rediscover humanity and let's share that with people. And that's where we started. And over the period of time, we built a number of things. One is called BizCatalyst 360. It's our website, and it's born of about 1,200 writers. It's been around over a decade. It's won several awards, and it's literally on every continent in the world. Um, we have what we call 360 Nation events, and they're all humanity-driven virtual events and in-person events that have a theme related to humanity. We have 360 Nation Studios, which we produce videos, all humanity driven. And the last thing we did, which is really near to our heart, and it's part of this thing, is GoodWorks 360. It's a standalone enterprise, and it's entirely dedicated to providing free consulting to good nonprofits around the world. Back to the point, everything we do today and every day is all about just making good, what I call making good shift happen. And since we don't worry about a profit, it just gives us so much freedom to react, Ed, and do some more good around the world.
Oh, this stirs up so many questions. When you look at the good that you are trying to achieve, do you have an image in your mind about if once we get to that point, say with a group in South Africa or in South Korea or some, once we get to this particular point, we know we have been successful. What does that look like? What is
Well,
what does
for the
impact look like to you?
that's going to go back to just the fun. It's funny when I'm going to answer the question, Ed, but everything I'm going to tell you is back to what I call fundamentals of humanity, things that we've kind of lost sight of. So we're trying to bring, I'm going to say the world, but we're doing it kind of one ripple, one person at a time, back to the principles of compassion, love, understanding, listening, sympathy, empathy. I could just go down the list. In fact, I'm in the middle of putting together not a charter, but a list of things that people can do that want to help us do more to get us back where I shouldn't say where we started. I'm not suggesting the world was always, through rose-colored glasses, but we've lost sight of a lot of those fundamental principles. So our roadmap is kind of pulling our community back in that direction versus creating something brand new. In essence, it is new, it's different because nobody else is doing it. The fact that we don't need to do it for a profit gives us the freedom to just keep, reacting and acting. And that's how we grew into all these other entities. But the list, by goodness, if I had to list the charter today, I think the last time I was doing a thing earlier this week on it, I had 36 things that if Ed said to me, Dennis, I'm really interested in what you're doing. How can I help? I would give you the list of 36 things. Saying, start here. And it's not rocket science. But I've learned over the years that when we say we want to rediscover and share humanity, I take that for granted that people understand what I mean. They don't. So that's why we're coming up now with a roadmap, as I call it. And it's a list of how people can just do more good.
Do you find, I mean, I have worked overseas, so I understand some of that, probably not at the level that you have, but I still have had experience and I have experience now with people from overseas that want to be connected to me. That one of the context that we know here in the West is different than the context that people in the developing world and in the Eastern world know. How do you deal with those differences in culture and in perception of the world and the way say nonprofits actually function in a society? They're different things in different places, and I'm curious as to that diversity of culture that exists in the world, but where humanity is the same in many respects in all of those places, but the structure of the work, the structure of business or organizations is different in so many different ways. How is it that you walk into a place like another country and be able to help them pretty quickly?
Well, first of all, as I'm going to borrow from people brighter than me, we meet them where they are. We take the time to understand their culture. I mean, generically, if we're talking about nonprofits, that's actually defined differently in certain
Right.
countries.
That's right.
It doesn't always mean not making a profit like some people think. It doesn't mean breaking even. It's in some countries, it's more of an ethos of operation as opposed to a P&L type operation. So we take the time to understand it. We don't focus entirely on just the nonprofit arena, but we bumped into them. Our very first nonprofit consulting gig under GoodWorks, which is a part of our operation, was a startup in Mumbai, India. They wanted to start what I'll call a Meals on Wheels operation, which you've probably heard of across this
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, when my wife and I got involved in nonprofits here in Tampa, Florida, our very first nonprofit we got involved with happened to be Meals on Wheels. We started delivering meals. That was years ago. We're still doing that. It's probably 14 years now. So when I was contacted by this, and let me back up. I ended up chairing Meals of We're Here. So I saw it from the bottom up and the top down, and I understood it. And I spent 10 years on the board. So when they reached out in India, I was up against what you just said. It's a very keen question you ask. It's India. What's the difference between me giving them nonprofit 101 advice? So we took the time to do something that very few people do. Number one, we listened. Almost like you said to me, tell me about 360 Nation. Tell me about, in that case, it was a startup. So I can't say, tell me about your nonprofit. Tell me about what's your vision. What are you trying to accomplish? Who are you trying to serve? I can give you all the operational consulting, but I need to do that. I need to understand it. And here's why we did that. And this was a learning experience for us. I've learned after dealing with nonprofits for many years, regardless of where they are, in the first 5 minutes, if you're the executive director or you're the guy that's starting it up, wherever you are, I can tell within the first 5 minutes whether your heart's in it versus what your vision looks like. And I've seen that time and time again, because if the guy or the gal at the top flips the light off at 5 p.m. and the mission statement's hanging on the wall, goes home, but he's not really living it or walking the talk of that nonprofit, it's going to have in my opinion, it's going to be a lot more difficult to help them help themselves, to help them raise money, to help them do what a nonprofit does. Because a genuine nonprofit, I'm speaking from somebody in the trenches here, got to walk the talk every day, and the person at the top has to have the passion and the compassion behind it. Otherwise, it's just a job. And that's a whole different model. Then you might as well just give them a normal business model. So we learn more about them by listening, but by listening, I'm also evaluating the level of commitment from the heart. And that drives us in all kinds of directions. I'm very happy to say that those questions went well. The nonprofit discussions went well, and they ultimately launched out of their, what we would call in America, our living room. That's what they were doing. And they're literally serving meals to the unfortunate people, mostly senior citizens, that just can't leave the home to get it themselves, which is frankly the Meals on Wheels model here in this country. Great question, though, Ed.
Well,
Culture, you got to bring in the culture.
what I have found is that the way Americans, I'm speaking of America, have done international philanthropy has made it difficult for local organizations to form, where they can see that that they have to establish a solid ground of fundraising right where they live. I mean, more and more of my interactions with people overseas who have organizations are asking me for money, and I think it's because they have been programmed to think that the money is supposed to come from the West, and and that their mindset is that this is where the money comes from, and it's sort of like there's a dependency model, and I tell these fellas, mostly they're all fellas, they're all men who are operating organizations, orphanages and churches and other kinds of businesses, that I don't give money. I don't give you money. I give you my insight. I give you my support, but I'm not giving you any money. You have to find the money there. And that's really it's a very difficult thing, because they have always been told that this is where the money comes from. They could go start their school, and somebody like me or you that they become connected with through Facebook or someplace like that will end up funding them. And all they have to do is present a well-crafted purpose statement. I mean, I had one that came in this morning on Facebook, and I have not responded to him but he's going to ask for money. I know he is, and they've learned this trick. And it's really a trick of, we're going to soften you up by convincing you that we are serious and we're doing good work. And yes, they probably are doing good work, but they don't know the difference. This is where I'd like to go. They don't know the difference between the fulfillment of their mission and the fulfillment of them as an organization. And those two things are different. The mission is we're going to care for children, or we're going to care for the elderly in our community, but they don't understand how actually a business operates, and they don't know how money actually enters into the equation.
Oh boy, that's a tough one. See, it's
Yeah,
interesting. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, it is a tough one. So I'm wondering if you've encountered that sort of thing, and then because it's obvious that you're bringing something significantly valuable to these communities overseas, and I mean, it thrills me to think that of what you're doing and the potential that exists in what you're doing, because I see these other situations where they just don't know how to do things, and so I keep talking to them about networking. Well, you need to build your network, and out of your network, I mean, it's like you and I met through Eric, and Eric introduced me to you, and now we're talking. And Eric's introducing me to a lot of people, and you're going to introduce me to people because this is the way we do things. Who do you know that you think I should know, and would you introduce us? That's the way business really operates today.
Wow.
But that's not what they have learned to do. And teaching them how to do networking says that we're independent, and we're now. And I'm going to say one more thing, and then because this is such a big issue for me. When I first went to Africa in 2019, I had a great time, and I had opportunity to train people who were doing rural economic development. And that was fantastic. And they're doing really great work. I go back in February of 2020, and this group takes me out to this man's home. He's a teacher. He's the trainer of people who are learning how to farm, rural economic development, by starting with chickens. And they take me out there. This is a Saturday. And all these women come out of the countryside to this home, and they're coming to meet me. I'm no one. I'm just an American traveling, who does leadership stuff, but they're coming to meet me. And so we sit down, and I decide to interview them. So I'm holding my phone up and I'm talking to them. And I am being taught by them about how to do things. And I'm so impressed with these. And these are not women who are educated. They were rural, poor people, but they're talking about how what they want for their families is to be self-sufficient and interdependent. And when that happens, it means that what's the term they used? Laziness and that sort of thing goes away, and that opens the door. Idleness goes away, because idleness opens the door to crime. And so they're talking about how you build a country, really how you build a country with industriousness and farming and self-sufficiency. And I was so impressed with that. It's the first episode of the Eddie Network podcast, that interview. So I see what you're doing fits into this larger picture of how the world is going to change in the future, because we have to help countries like Kenya or Thailand or wherever it is where you have a lot of people who are not economically well off. We need to find ways to help them gain the skills, which is what you're offering to them, of how to make that happen.
Yeah, you're right. And since we're doing it literally for free, we've got to be careful. And when I say careful, you normally do some level of due diligence.
Right.
And again, part of this, what didn't exist when we launched, we learned it despite all my nonprofit experience. I was still trying to figure out, how do I position this right? Because we may end up with an avalanche. of too much work. And frankly, how we do it, we have a network of about 4 dozen professionals like you and me around the world who have said, Dennis, I can't join a board. I can't do this, but I can donate my time. So we allocate time virtually like this, like text, like email. That's how we implement. But before we take advantage of Ed's time or anybody else's time, I, I spend an awful lot of time personally talking to well, what I would call an executive director or whoever it is that's running the existing one, if it exists. But there's questions I ask, and we need to figure out first, do they know what they're doing? And that sounds like a crazy question, but do they, yeah, I know you want to deliver meals, for example, but have you thought it through? Where are you going to get your funding from? Where are you going to get your volunteer? Where are you going to get the list of 10 questions that if it's a startup, any reasonable startup would normally be asking. But to your point, Ed, given on where they are, they're thinking more of the passionate side of the mission.
That's right.
We got to feed these people. They haven't thought through. Now that's where we can come in and help, but then it
Uh-huh.
takes us back to the beginning. Is the person running it fully committed with their heart, not just their head? Do they have a team together? And before you ask us for help, who's going to be on your board? Are they committed? Will they accept help from a third party? Different culture. Are they going to welcome us? Not just because we're free, but because we may have a different way of doing things. We've gone down a lot of those questions. We've actually scared away some, not because we were being difficult, but because we were being thoughtful and they hadn't thought
Yeah.
it through. So the end result was go away and think about it. And when you can answer these 10 questions, come back to us. But you got to figure it out on the ground within your culture and within your resources before we can give you operational help, how to run a business. Because as you know, Ed, most nonprofits are basically a small business. Their funding is different, but it's
Right.
sales, it's marketing, it's an internet. Now today it's social media.
Yeah.
We've helped nonprofits get into cryptocurrency, believe it or not. But the core business has to be thought through like any startup walking into a bank wanting to borrow money. In this case, they're borrowing our time.
Yeah. I totally see that. I totally agree with you. So this is the opportunity. This is a great opportunity.
Yes.
And this is, I mean, from my perspective, the fact that, oh, here we go. Here's my phone. There's my phone. The fact that we can take this and in a matter of about 2 minutes be in communication with someone in Mumbai or,
Yep.
wherever it may be, answering a question that is immediate to them says that we're no longer in a global community, we're in a local community. And that we're members of their local community. They're not members of our local community because they're not talking to us about our situation. We're their advisors or we're their helpers in their local community, and we should consider ourselves a part of their local community.
Right. Very well put.
And that's and how to me that is one of the exciting things because like with these women that I interviewed, they teach us something that we can bring back to America. And in my being able to talk to groups here in the States about being self-sufficient and interdependent because of what I saw in rural Kenya, it's a mind blower because
I agree, and particularly when they're up against a lot more hurdles and funding is harder to get, operations are harder to run, and yet somehow they've overcome that because they've got such passion for their mission. They've figured
yeah,
it out at a local level, and it's funny you say it because we can learn from their model sometimes more than I can teach them from our model, just
yeah.
because they've got something called perseverance, resilience, and they're willing to just dig in because they are so committed.
Well,
Interesting. We've seen. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
they've lost all their illusions.
Very well put. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what all they have, I mean, in case these women, is the land.
Mm,
And and so they learned to the chicken is the most economically viable enterprise in rural developing countries because you can get more chickens, get more eggs. With more eggs and more chickens, you can sell some of the chickens, sell some of the eggs, eat some of the chickens, eat some of the eggs. I mean, you can feed yourself and also make money off of it.
Mm.
I met a fella from the Ivory Coast at one of the training things I was doing, and he had been operating with this system for a year. And at that point, he had, I think, 30 chickens, but he also had like 25 or 30 goats and had purchased an acre of land. And so he was growing a farming enterprise. And at some point, he was going to begin with cattle. He was going to have cattle. And then the last stage of that was start growing trees.
Hmm. Wow.
So, and you can do all of that without a whole lot of money. That's why I think this program is so good. But you see that's available to people who are in rural areas. It's more difficult in an urban environment to do that because you don't have access to the land.
Mm.
So what is it? So what do you see happening in urban developing countries that um, encourages you about the future of the world because of what you're seeing? I mean, you're seeing it through probably your projects, but you see what's happening that says there's a there is economic opportunity and prosperity being able to.
Well, what we've seen and what we're encouraged by, and I think we could all learn from this, Ed, great question, is the local folks, I hate to put it this way, that are part of the game, if you will, the local culture. They know where the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, they know how to get things done. They're not waiting for the government to come in and fix it by just throwing more money at it. They know what the issue is. So they're building it from the ground floor up with whatever resources they can find versus waiting for, I'll call the nanny state to come in and fix it.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be, and I'm not just talking, I mean, it's across the board. It's not just nonprofit homeless, not feeding, housing. Another big issue, of course, is homeless. But they're finding ways to fix it. And I sit back in amazement at the level of, I don't know, hard work they're willing to put in. Um, yeah, they want funding, but they're walking the talk first. And frankly, I think in those cases, the government is more likely to step in, not to try and orchestrate it, but to help support it through whatever resources. So you kind of plug in job services, you plug in other mechanisms that will help whatever that community is that their nonprofit serving versus waiting for the government, because bureaucrats haven't necessarily run anything and they don't understand what's going on in that local city or that local town. It's encouraging. I've said to many people, I wish I could just bottle that perseverance and that level of energy that some of these local people, they're saying, I'm going to feed these people despite the environment. I'm going to feed despite the hurdles. The challenge every one of them has, and I wouldn't limit this to out of this country, I'd say across America as well, is visibility. Visibility and credibility. And here's what I mean by that. Visibility means Tampa Bay, where I'm right today, Meals on Wheels, other big because of the nature of this community and the number of big businesses here, it is not hard if you have a good nonprofit to do a fundraiser and get corporate donations on all things. But if you're sitting in Boise, Idaho, small town America, I don't mean to pick on them. You may have the greatest nonprofit theory, mission, vision, but people don't know you're there. They don't have the corporate presence. Somehow they've got to break through everything else and say, I'm over here in Boise and I need help too. We try to help them through our other operations. This big website we have, we give them visibility, which either brings them volunteers or donations. The other issue they're up against, and whether it be this country or others, and this is a big one, and this is credibility. What I mean by that is, every so often, we don't often see great stories of nonprofits on the front pages of our newspaper. We see the ones that scuttled the money or embezzled the money or something went
Yes.
wrong. It didn't go to the mission, which turns a lot of people skeptical. So what's interesting is through GoodWorks, one of the requests we now get has nothing to do with running a nonprofit. It's more about, Dennis, I've known you for years and I know you do this stuff. My husband and I want to donate money, but we're afraid to. We don't know where to give it because we're concerned the money isn't going to get where it's supposed to be. Now, there are different ratios you can look at for a typical nonprofit. A good one, baseline, 70 cents on every dollar should be going to the cause. The rest covers overhead. The better ones are in the 80s. Meals on Wheels was close to 90, which is why I affiliated myself with them, because they weren't worried about the big flashy offices. Over time, GoodWorks, we've shifted. We say we are only going to help the small to medium nonprofits. The big boys don't need us. That allows us to focus on the smaller ones, but we're always faced with making sure the money's going where it belongs. And we have ways we can figure that out. But credibility is an issue. It's a shame. So we now find ourselves redirecting people or helping them diligence existing nonprofits, no matter where they are. They might just say, look, I want to help children. Well, we can help them find children's nonprofits. And then we can say, of the ones we've looked at, this is the one we would donate to if it was me, because I know the money's getting to where it belongs. So it's a PR issue. It's a credibility issue. It's a visibility issue. When we find good ones, though, Ed, we just shout them from the rooftops, though.
So how do people who find out what you're doing and find that they want to, how do they find out what you're doing? And then how do they become involved with what you're doing? Because
Well,
I'd like to
we've been
see,
good.
and I don't want to see you overwhelmed, but I'd like to see more people involved with what you're doing.
Well, I always direct people to our main website because it all started there, and that's bizcatalyst360.com, which sounds like a business website. It was in the early days more business, but now it's not. That one has about 1,200 writers from around the world. But from that, if you come to that website, you're going to see a big box called 360 Nation, because that grew out of that. When you click on 360 Nation, it's going to talk to you about our nonprofit foundation, which is GoodWorks 360. It's going to talk to you about everything else we do around the world, our mission, our vision, everything I'd want to know about a place. And it's going to emphasize the fact one more time that unlike virtually any other enterprise, there's no money in it for us. We're working from the heart. And that gives us the ability to make, and there's a lot of ways people can help. But we don't do it for money. It's really through their sense of community, their connection, their willingness to work, collaborate to rediscover humanity. Everybody's got it inside them. We just have to help them get it out.
Um, are there specific areas, say, of talent or resources or assets or capabilities that that you need that you're lacking now, that that maybe these things, if someone has these sort of things, they should be reaching out to you today and saying, well,
I'm pleased to say that we are. I'm not going to say we're comfortable, but we've kind of got it figured out. The only area that we're always willing, if you will, and able to take on more help would be under the GoodWorks 360. And what I mean by that, that's the nonprofit thing, and that's the thing that's entirely supported by virtual talent. So if anybody out there has any talent in any area of operating a business, because as I said earlier, a nonprofit is a business. It's just a different bottom line. They can reach out to us through BizCatalyst 360, and we will take them on board, subject to just a few questions. And what we do, literally, if you were going to do that, Ed, we would say, all right, we just need to understand your skill sets. And we have this large spreadsheet. And right now there's about 4 dozen people covering every area of a business. So I know then if 3 months from now I get a contact from Mumbai, India, and they need help in social media, I can go to my spreadsheet. I've got an expert here. I make the introduction. We have a structured way we do this, and then we get going. So any area of a business expertise, people that have time and would like to help, but maybe can't do it hands-on like we do, have them knock at our door. We'll find a home for them.
sounds very good.
Yeah, we kind of figured it out, Ed. I don't want to sound like we're an expert, but from working inside a nonprofit, from being hands-on in the field, delivering meals and working with homeless, and then from just background in running a business, we've kind of figured it out. We now know how to work the model. It's shifted a bit since the pandemic. And what I mean by that, just to give you just a little bit of a segue, we saw a shift in the nonprofits. The world stopped. Everybody's kind of in the same boat, nonprofits. It went from reaching out to us prior to the pandemic for operational help, which is primarily the free consulting we do, to more discussions one-on-one between me and whoever ran the nonprofit, wherever they're. What they wanted, Ed, effectively was somebody to hold their hand. They'd
Yeah.
never seen anything like this. They didn't know what to do. And in a normal business, as you've got resources, people that can handle this sudden change in the way business is being done. In a nonprofit, you look around and a lot of them are just volunteers. So the people at the top were afraid, literally. And they wanted somebody like me who's been in business to say it's going to be okay. And a lot of times the discussions, there's one-on-one discussions wherever, might be in a half an hour, might be an hour. I didn't give them any silver bullets, but they needed somebody to feed back to them what they were saying and reframe it and tell them it'll be all right. And if they wanted some advice of Dennis, what would you do if you were facing with this volunteer shortage because people can't come out of their house? And we noodled it a
Yeah.
lot. But
Yeah.
that's been a consistent theme since the pandemic, and it hasn't died down. There are still nonprofits trying to re-get their foots back on the ground.
What you just identified is what I've seen for decades, which is that people who are in leadership roles, and when I use that term, I mean they're the managers of the business, and they need to function as leaders if they're going to manage the business well. So I'm making a distinction there. You can run your business, but it's better to lead your business. That's the kind of the way to sing it. But what I realized was that most of these people are working in a very isolated environment. And the only people that they talk to are people like themselves who are also isolated. So the misery loves company sort of thing.
It's that old theory of it's lonely at the top, and I believe that.
I know it's true. It is absolutely true. And the problem with that is that it cuts them off from information,
Ah, yeah, yeah.
and it cuts them off from understanding what their people are doing. But
Well, and they don't necessarily want to look vulnerable, so they can't talk down. They've got to find somebody like you or me that's kind of not
that's right.
disconnected, but we're not going to make a judgment. We're just going to help.
So what we're doing is in a sense is inviting them to change their behaviors as leaders. And
Yes.
and so in order to do that, and this is the terminology that's been told to me numerous times, the most effective moments of that is when I've done something and they will turn to me and say, um, we believe in ourselves because you believe in us.
Wow. That's powerful.
It's extraordinarily powerful, and all you have to do, I mean, in a sense, that is what I'm translating into the podcast. Is my guests are people I believe in. May not always agree with them, but I believe in them, and I believe that they will do the right thing and move through the stages of learning and of change if they know that there is at least one person who believes in them.
That's very powerful.
And I think that's
Absolutely.
what you're offering to these people
Well,
around the world is that sense of belief that we believe that you can do this if you just find that thing within you that allows you to do the work
yes.
that is necessary to be done.
And that goes back to having the heart in the mission, which is where
That's
I
right.
started this discussion on. But when I said earlier, we don't do anything for money, that's the payback right there. When you see some of those that go forward then and they get over that hump and they are a success in however you define it, that's just remarkable. And then we point to them when we're working with other nonprofits. Say, look, that guy there or that lady there worked with us and they've done marvelous things. And we try to connect them because they're all in it together. Maybe a different nonprofit mission, but essence is the same.
Yeah.
It's the heart, it's the passion, it's the resilience, it's the volunteer, it's the fundraising. And suddenly they've got their own little community going of, I've seen that movie before. How did you deal with it?
Yeah. I'm so glad you're doing this.
Well, thank you.
It's really encouraging. It's encouraging to me because, I'm in this field too. And I love that other people are trying to do this as well. And
Well,
it's,
it fits so nicely under our umbrella of rediscovering humanity because, we've got the time, we've got the talent, we can write checks, but I'd rather give back to people that haven't had that same opportunity. And boy, doesn't that feel good.
it does. Well, thank you, Dennis, for being on the show today. And send me whatever you would like us to put in the show notes. And because
Okay.
we want to spread the word on what you're doing, because it
I'll
really
do
is
that. And
spectacular.
thank you for not only carving out the time, but, bringing forward some great questions because I feel like people listening here will truly understand more about the nonprofit world. And we're much more than just nonprofits, but that's a great way to focus because they need help.
Well, I do see that we're in this massive transition, and whatever we thought of the nonprofit world of 30 years ago, for example, is not the nonprofit of the next 10 years.
Oh, amen. Amen to
And,
that. You
and
nailed
we'll
it.
have fewer nonprofits, but they'll be stronger as a result. We could keep going on, but so thank you, and we'll probably do this again sometime because I think
That'd be great. No, it'd be
more to,
great to have a
it's more
follow-up.
to there's more depth to plumb for this topic, and would love to have some more conversation. But thank you. So
As-
thank you for being on today.
You're welcome. We'll chat again, my friend.
Okay, and thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.